Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Action Center's first Fireside Chat of 2021. Hope you've all had a great New Year so far. My name is Amy Shaw. I am one of the donor relations officers here at the Action Center. And I just want to say thank you for joining us. Today we are demystifying the enterprise zone, which is a benefit we are thrilled to have here at the Action Center that we're able to offer you. And here to present today is Vanessa Zarate from the City of Lakewood Economic Development Department, and also Ron Seigneur, CPA from Seigneur Gustafson. So thank you guys both so much for being here. Before we start, I'd like to say hi to John as well. John's here. Hi, John. Just a couple housekeeping things. If you hover at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a chat button. If at any time during this presentation you have a question, please feel free to type it out into the chat box. As soon as our presentation is over, we will have some time for Q&A, so we'll be able to answer it then. And then, Ron, if you'd like to get your slideshow started, I will give the last direction here. Perfect. Now, if you don't already have all of us on the side of the screen, in the top right corner of your screen, there is a view button. If you click on that and click on side-by-side gallery, that will make it so that you won't have us in the way of the slides, so you'll be able to read everything. So that's it. Without further ado, you guys can take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Amy. We're thrilled to be able to do this today for the Action Center, a great institution in our community. We've got our contact information at the end of the slide deck, and I think both of us welcome questions. We'll try to answer whatever questions come in while we're going through the slides we have today, but feel free to contact us afterwards as well. And I'm going to say just a couple words about myself and then turn it over to Vanessa to introduce herself and what her department does, and then kick off our presentation. I'm a CPA. We have an office at 940 Wadsworth in the Fricke Law Building. We do a lot of tax work for people in the community, businesses and individuals. And the enterprise zone credit is a big part of what we help folks with. So hopefully we can demystify that, as Amy said, and as opposed to adding additional confusion to the complicated world of taxes and tax credits. But we're excited to be able to do this for you. And I'm going to, while I have the floor here, also give a shout out for the West Colfax Community Association, which Vanessa and I both serve on the board of, and we're privileged to be part of that as well. So the Action Center is an organization that we support through that. And if you want information on that, westcolfax.org. And with that, I'll turn it over to Vanessa.
Good. Thank you, Ron. And hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Vanessa Sadate, and I am a Senior Economic Development Specialist at the City of Lakewood. And our goal as a team is to help businesses grow the economy. We talk a lot about, growing the number of jobs, growing the number of businesses. And we use a lot of tools, resources, and partners in that endeavor. The enterprise zone being one, and the enterprise zone being a tool that nonprofits can use as well as existing businesses to grow and expand. And we'll talk a little bit more about it, but for any businesses that are on the call, please feel free to reach out. We're here to help. So Enterprise Zone is a program that started from the state of Colorado. It's run through the Office of Economic Development and International Trade in the 80s. And the goal of this program is to encourage investment and development in areas that are considered economically distressed. That can mean you have a higher unemployment rate, you have a lower per capita income, you have a slower population growth, or a combo of any of those above. We are part of the Jefferson County Enterprise Zone, so all of the credits that we'll talk about today are processed through Jefferson County and then turned through the state. But there are two sides of enterprise zones. If you are a business, not a nonprofit, there is a lot of credits you can take as a business if you are in an enterprise zone. You normally for things that you're probably already doing. So if you hire new employees, if you train them, if you do any kind of R&D research, if you have vehicles for your building, if you're going into a building that's been empty for 2 years and meets a couple other criteria, so there's some incentives for rehab credits. All of the above, working to help the area become less distressed, more economically viable, more jobs, more incomes, and growing. So that is how enterprise zones hope to operate. And then on the contribution side, there are contribution projects like the Action Center that work with us and economic development teams to help us reach our goals as well. So the Action Center is working to hit all these things, help people stay employed, help people, find income, help people stay off the streets. So the Action Center is a tool and a resource within the Enterprise Zone program to help counties and the state reach economic development goals. And as a contribution project, you can get a credit for contributing to them. So Ron's going to talk in more detail what that looks like for you as the donor, but when you contribute to a certified contribution project, you can get 25% cash back on a credit back on all cash donations, and 12.5% back on any in-kind donations. And the bulk of this presentation is going to be Ron talking about the tax portions of the enterprise zone. But the enterprise zone is great. There's a lot of components to it for nonprofits, for donors, as well as for businesses located within the zone to help reach economic development goals, help kind of elevate the community in which we're operating and make it less distressed.
Thanks, Vanessa. I've posted a couple slides here that show some of the recent history, the legislative history of the enterprise zone program in Colorado. It actually started in 1986, and I'm old enough to know that was also in conjunction with a pretty serious downturn in economic conditions in the mid 80s. And this was just part of like, how do we stimulate the local economy? And that's when the Colorado legislature gave birth to the enterprise zone program. And there's more information on the enterprise zone websites that we'll give you a reference to. But a couple things here that are worth noting is in 2012, there was some legislation to create a task force to just review the effectiveness of the enterprise zone. It's been around since 1986, and it's like, was it working? Does it provide the right stimulus to the right areas? In 2013, part of that legislation was to have a 10-year sunset provision, and there's something called the Colorado Economic Development Commission that studies every 10 years, are the zones in the appropriate areas? Do they need to be redefined? And I think we're about halfway through the current sunset period, so these will be looked at again in a few years to determine whether the zones are appropriate and doing the right things. So it's just something to be aware of, because as we look at the map of the partial map of the Jefferson County Economic Development Zone, which we just did a capture here, and the red star is approximately where the Action Center is. It being in an enterprise zone qualifies for the contributions that we're going to talk about, as well as the other areas along West Colfax and along Wadsworth. And it's kind of interesting because I live west of the Action Center, and I work at 940 Wadsworth, so I'm in and about the enterprise zone a lot, and it's kind of interesting to kind of look at like Belmar, for example, being in the enterprise zone, and you drive by going, does that really need enterprise zones? Maybe when the next sunset comes up, it might be redefined not to be, but we'll leave that for the commission to decide as they review the program. And they review it for all of the, I think, 16 economic development zones that are throughout the state. So to get down into the nitty gritty a little bit, to qualify for the contribution credits that we'll go through and talk about the tax kind of mechanism in the next few slides, you need to have a certification statement. And here there's a lot of stuff on this screen, but you've got a kind of a redacted copy of the certification form that you can submit to get back to support your cash contribution. And I'll talk about the mechanics of that in a few minutes. There's some links here to get to both the Colorado Enterprise Zone program, and Jeffco Economic Development has a enterprise zone information, and they have a great kind of summary document that shows not only the credits that we're talking about, the contribution credits, but the other business credits that Vanessa touched on. And then lastly, there's an individual here, Lisa Harper, who works with Vanessa and their whole department, and is there to help people, you know, that are trying to process their enterprise zone, you know, documents and certifications. So you've got the contact there for that person. So, you know, take advantage of that and go to the websites if you want more information beyond what we're going to be able to cover in our limited time today. But this will at least give you a feel for kind of the form that you need to have. I'm going to put on my tax hat for a few minutes and talk about kind of the difference between a tax deduction and a tax credit, because what we're actually talking about both things here, and you'll see that in the next couple of slides. From a income tax standpoint, something like a charitable contribution is a deduction, if it qualifies for a deduction, that reduces your taxable income that then the tax rates are subjected to determine your appropriate share of federal and state income tax. So a charitable contribution, whether it's in an enterprise zone or not, it can give you a tax deduction. And I'm going to talk about a nuance to that in a second, because it's changed with recent tax law. A tax credit, on the other hand, is a dollar for dollar credit against your taxes. So if you get a $250 tax credit, you can take that credit directly against your income tax obligation, as opposed to just lowering your taxable income and only getting the benefit of whatever your effective tax rate is. So it's kind of important to understand that. If I've lost some of you, feel free to follow up with me, and I'll try to walk you through it. But it's kind of an important concept that I think this slide may help to kind of help emphasize. In this example, if you give a donation of $1,000 that qualifies to a qualified nonprofit, you get to take a deduction for that $1,000, and it can lower your taxes by $1,000. And if you're in a 25% tax bracket, let's just say 20% federal tax and 5% Colorado, it can save you $250 of tax, because you're being taxed on $1,000 of less income at effective tax rates of 20 and 5% or 25%. If in this instance you give that donation to the Action Center as a qualified charity that's in an enterprise zone, and you get your certification processed, which the Action Center will help you with, you can also take a credit of $250 against your Colorado taxes. So in this example, you save $250 in combined income taxes, and you get a credit of another $250 in direct tax credits. So it really only costs you $500 in terms of out-of-pocket costs to make that $1,000 donation. I'm going to go a little deeper into being a tax geek now. The tax law changes, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 that took effect at the beginning of 2018 changed the dynamic of standard deductions versus itemized deductions, raised the standard deduction, so you only get to take itemized deductions, including charitable contributions, if they exceed your standard deduction. So But there's a carve out that you get to deduct the first $300 of donations, what we call above the line. You get a direct deduction for $300 of charitable contributions. And the rest, if you use this $1,000 as the example, the remaining $700 would only be deductible for your tax savings as opposed to the tax credit if you are itemizing your deductions subject to those limitations on standard deductions versus itemized deductions. I know that's probably not articulated as well as it could be, but that's part of what we in our shop call the Accountant's Full Employment Act, and I'd be happy to walk anyone through that. Regardless of whether or not you qualify for the complete deduction of the charitable donation, if you process your paperwork to a qualified organization, someone like the Action Center, you're still going to benefit from that tax credit, the $250. So there's a great benefit to giving to charities that are in enterprise zones and going through the process to take that Colorado tax credit. The next couple slides give you an example of the tax forms that are part of filing for the Colorado tax credit. And there are actually two forms here. I'm going to go to the second one, which is DR form 1366. And you can get this all at colorado.gov. You can get tax forms if you need these extra tax forms, because if you certify and give a donation to the Action Center or another qualified charity, you're going to need to complete this form and attach it to your Colorado tax return when you take that credit. This schedule here goes through the calculations to limit the cash contributions for the cash amounts and the in-kind contributions to a maximum of $100,000. The Action Center would be happy if you start bumping up against that limit, but this applies whether you're giving $200, $500, $1,000, or up to $100,000. But there's limits on how much of that you can deduct, and this walks you through the math between lines 46 and 57. If you can't use all the credit against your income taxes, it carries over to the next tax year. So if for some reason you've lost your job in this current year and you take the tax credit and you can't use the tax credit because maybe you don't have Colorado taxes, it will carry over to future years when you do have Colorado taxes that you can apply the credit to. So that's important to understand. The math from this form 1366 will carry back to this form and be placed on line 15. This is part of the actual Colorado individual income tax form. And on line 15 is where you carry the math from the form we were just looking at to fill in on line 15 as a credit against your taxable income, which is computed above. You get down to line 9, Colorado taxable income, you compute your tax from the tax table on tax 10. And then there are certain other types of credits that you can take against that Colorado computed tax, including the contribution credit that we're talking about today in our fireside chat. I love the term fireside chat. I wish we were sitting next to a fire. But in any event, as I mentioned, there's a maximum of $100,000 on a combined basis. So if you give to multiple charities that are in an enterprise zone, it's going to limit you to that $100,000. And if you don't use all of your credit, it does carry forward for the next 5 years. So that's a nice benefit as well to be aware of. So getting back to how this all ties back to the Action Center, they will help you to process your form. You're going to need to get them certain information so they can get the tax certificate that you'll need for your tax reporting purposes. But they're more than willing to help you with any of that. And that we're at the end here, and I'm going to ask Vanessa if she's got anything to add to the comments I've made, and then we'll see if we've got any Q&A questions.
Nope. Only comment I have. we are mandated by the state to re-look at these zones every 10 years, as Ron mentioned, and that is done by us here on the ground. So all the local economic development officials work with the counties to figure out what areas in their jurisdictions should or could qualify, and then it gets approved by the states, but that is done here locally in partnership with like my office and the county to figure out Lakewood's portion of the enterprise zone.
Thank you. I see we have a couple questions coming in. When does the state send out the certificate? From my experience from working with clients is they're pretty good at turning around the certificate processing part. When you submit it, they'll process it. Basically what they do is they verify that the charity that you're asking to take a credit for is indeed in an enterprise zone. I can't speak to how quickly they turn it around, but it's a fairly quick process. Second question here, who do we contact at Action Center to get the form? I have left messages, but have not heard back from Amy.
I can answer that question.
I will have Amy. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer that.
I'm actually, I will put in the chat box right now. This is something I was going to do anyway. Our development associate, Madison DeLita, she is actually the one who processes all of these. So I will put her information in the chat box here. So please feel free to take that down and contact her. I did want to, we do have quite a few questions on my end too. Ron, I'm not sure if you have any more on yours, but one thing I wanted to mention real quick was from Loretta, who says, I think the Action Center allows you to use a different identifier instead of social security number. However, when I did that, the state wasn't able to match up the paperwork. So the state removed the credit and I had to dispute it with the state to get it reinstated. I have not heard that happening of anybody else. However, we don't take your entire social security number. We only take the last 4 digits. That way it still keeps it private. So I have not, I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about that, because I have not heard about anything like that. So Ron, I don't know if you had any more questions.
I do see the questions in the chat, and I'll try to go through a couple of those as well. One question, does the credit pertain only to earned income? The credit is against your Colorado income tax. Colorado income tax is a function of your federal taxable income that then gets adjusted for certain Colorado issues where there's differences between federal taxable income and Colorado taxable income for municipal bond interest. There's a pension exclusion if you're receiving a pension that might be taxable on your federal return. There's an exemption of the first $20,000 per spouse on the Colorado income tax. So you compute your Colorado income tax, and then this credit would be available against whatever that computed income tax is. One question, unfortunately, is as individuals, you are what's called a cash basis taxpayer. So if you make a charitable contribution today, that's a charitable contribution for 2021. So unfortunately, you would not get to take that credit against your 2020 taxes. So you're even though that you're just in the process of filling out the forms for 2020, the credit that you give relates to the tax year that you're actually giving that donation in.
Okay, so Ron, was that you answering the question, does credit pertain only to earned income?
Yeah, it's earned income is part of what would be factored into your federal taxable income, and then that federal taxable income carries over to the first line of the individual Colorado tax form, and then gets adjusted, as I said, for things like the pension exclusion. So I wish it was a simpler process, but it's not. So
So Keela had another question as well. Can we contribute this year for 2020 taxes, or did contribution have to be made by 12/31?
And that's what I was saying, Amy, that we're all cash basis taxpayers. So any contribution you make currently would be eligible for a credit and a deduction in 2021 and would not be available to go back and use against the 2020 taxes that you'd just be filing for this year.
Okay. And it looks like I have a website from the state here. I'm going to put that up. And it looks like we don't have any other questions. Oh, it looks like Susan just, can you get a tax credit for both cash contributions and in-kind contributions to the Action Center?
Yes, you can actually. They're treated a little differently. You get a larger value for the cash contribution, and you get a 25% of the contribution for the cash contribution, and a 12.5% of the value for in-kind contributions. So if you gave $1,000 in cash and $1,000 of furniture, for example, you get $250 of credit for the cash, and you get $125, 12.5% of the $1,000 of in-kind property. And those two would be added together, and you'd have $375 of combined credit that would qualify as a tax credit against your Colorado taxes.
I also want to mention too, as far as in-kind goes, stock contributions are actually accepted through the enterprise zone tax credit, but they are treated as in-kind. So you would only get 12.5% for a stock contribution as well.
Thank you for mentioning that, Amy. And that's an actual additional layer of complexity, because if you have, let's say you've been holding some stock in a portfolio, maybe you've inherited some stock and you want to donate that. For federal tax purposes, you can take the value, subject to certain limits, the value of the stock, if it's publicly traded, as a donation deduction. But for purposes of calculating the credit for the enterprise zone, it's going to be treated as in-kind property, and you're going to get the 12.5% instead of the 25%.
Okay, so it looks like we have one more question here. I want to say, Maria, yes, the presentation is going to be available online. That's one of the things I wanted to mention. We will be sending a follow-up email later today, and it will have this presentation in there as well. So if you want to revisit it, or if you want to share it, you can feel free to do that as well. John asked, can the same cash donation be applied to the tax deduction and the tax credit?
Well, as I tried to articulate, so $1,000 would you'd take a charitable contribution deduction for that, subject to the itemized, the first 300 for every taxpayer would be a direct above the line deduction. The other 700, using 1,000 as the example, would be a deduction if you itemize your deductions. That same $1,000 would also be eligible for the 25% enterprise zone credit against your Colorado taxes. That's if you remember that slide where we said the value of that $1,000 deduction is really $500 when you compute the value of the deduction and the credit together based on that same $1,000.
Okay, awesome. So I know we're getting more questions. We are running out of time right now. So what we're going to do is take all of those questions and make sure that we get them answered and have them in our follow-up email later today. I was just going to say we've got Ron and Vanessa's information as well. If you'd like to take that down, I'm sure we'll include that in the email as well. So if you do have questions, you can feel free to follow up with them. I want to say a giant thank you to all of you for joining us. and taking some time out of your day to learn more about the Enterprise Zone. And just wanted to throw out too, we have more Fireside Chats every month, so please keep an eye out for that. And we also offer a virtual tour that is on our website, theactioncenter.org. So I would encourage everybody to go check that out. It shows how things have changed since COVID hit. And that is all we've got. Ron and Vanessa, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you. And I can say I learned a lot today that I can take with me and tell donors as well. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks for having us, and please reach out with questions. I'm sure Ron and I are both happy to help.
Thank you.
Thank you.